President Cyril Ramaphosa has emphasized the efforts made in the battle against corruption and the part played by the Special Investigative Unit in recent years. Ramaphosa delivered the keynote address at the opening session of the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council's National Dialogue on Building a Corrupt-Free South Africa. Now, however, will these engagements help in curbing corruption in the country? Senior reporter Aviwe Mtila is tracking this story for us, and he joins me now live. Now, Aviwe, we've seen developments even around the Secretary General of the ANC, even going to the police station earlier today to open a case against someone who made allegations against him. How is government saying they're going to deal with all of this?
Well, that's exactly what's being delved in, Masejo, at this national dialogue of the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council. That's the council, of course, that advises President Cyril Ramaphosa on how to tackle corruption. First day, of course, opened even with the keynote address by the president, and the suggestion there is that corruption itself is widespread. If you are to ask some of even the delegates that are inside here, you'll be told that it's actually in every sphere of government, whether it be national, provincial or local government. And the crux of the issue, where the majority of this corruption emanates from, is around procurement. If you are to ask pointedly the Special Investigating Unit, which was lauded here by President Cyril Ramaphosa for doing good work over the last 5 years, the SIU will tell you, in fact, that 95 to 98% of all its investigation, the source of corruption there was in procurement. So what's to be done about it? Let's find out from the person that actually heads the SIU. That's Advocate Andy Mutebe. Advocate, thank you for joining us at eNCA. You've made this astonishing revelation just around where the source and the root of corruption is, procurement in these various entities. How do we deal and tackle then this corruption decisively? What needs to be done around procurement, and where are you finding these corruption shenanigans?
No, thank you very much for the opportunity. You are correct. Most of the losses that we have uncovered based on the allegations that were made are in procurement. As you correctly said, our estimation is that around 95 to 98% of our cases emanate from procurement process, simply because that's where the money is. Government invests money in service delivery by using the procurement system to appoint companies, individuals to do the work. Now, there has been collusion that we have found between public sector officials and private sector companies that are colluding to make sure that the procurement system is corrupted so that certain companies end up with contracts. What is it that we need to do? Now, this national dialogue provides us, and I mean the public, business, civil society, government, with a platform to really rethink and reset the anti-corruption architecture in the country. With regard to procurement itself, I mean, there's a specific stream here that's going to be looking at procurement reform. But our observation from our investigations, if I use, for example, the PPE investigations that we have investigated so long and produced the results and held so many to account, including yesterday when we announced that executives at Transnet colluded with suppliers, right, so that the certain suppliers can end up with contracts. Now, what do we do in that case, amongst others? Remember, our focus is to ensure that those who are held or those who are responsible are held to account. Firstly, if evidence points to certain individuals, we must make sure that we recover the monies that state has lost. So in this case, Transnet would have lost certain monies. In the process of recovery, we freeze the pensions of those who resign, because we have seen the practice of people resigning before consequence management. Now, we are of the view that we need to overhaul the procurement process. We need transparency in the procurement process. There is other countries that have really demonstrated that open procurement can really go a long way in mitigating this underhandedness, this collusive tendencies. We have seen, for example, if I were to mention, the Gauteng government has actually piloted at some point, and that's the pilot project that we really need to look at, the open procurement system. We need processes in the procurement space that creates what we call checks and balances, right? So that if I am an individual in charge of the supply chain process, I shouldn't be responsible for, crafting the bid specification, go and also be responsible for the evaluation of the company that should get the contract, and ultimately be the awarding official. That is a recipe for corruption.
So, as you mentioned, Advocate, a lot of these people tend to resign once either the hawks or the departments are on their tails. And often enough, South Africans want to see people in orange overalls. Are you saying maybe that's not the final resort? There are other measures in place. Tell us about Transnet. You mentioned that those that have resigned, there is a possibility of freezing their pensions. Do you give us more detail?
Thank you very much for that question. As part of our investigations and reaching outcomes and holding those who are responsible to account, we have seen a phenomenon where people are aware that there's evidence pointing to them, and what do? They resign before consequence management is meted out on them, whether it's disciplinary hearing and the others. So we have now taken a decision that we will freeze their pensions. What they have worked hard or not so hard for, we will freeze it, so that it's part and parcel of the process that we will recover ultimately when we go to the special tribunal or to the High Court. In the Transnet case, there are executives who colluded with the suppliers, and in the process of investigating, they realized that evidence is pointing to them, and they sought to resign. So yesterday we announced that through the special tribunal we freezed their pension, and we'll hold on to them until the case is concluded, where an order is made to recover monies owed to Transnet. On the prosecution side, you would have seen that various investigations, right, SIU, Investigative Directorate, NPA, and the Hawks have led to certain outcomes. There are executives who are in court, previous CEOs, previous executives, and those processes have to be seen through so that people end up in what the public calls, orange overalls, which literally means people must be jailed. You must do a jail term so that it can be clear that there's really consequence management.
And you mentioned these different entities, NPA, the Hawks, SIU, where the president is sort of deferring, the call for corruption to be dealt with effectively as these entities that need to deal with them. The president says it's not on his behalf. He can't handle corruption, whereas there's these various institutions. And we're having now the Chief Justice that says that there needs to be an anti-corruption commission, a whole new law enforcement sort of authority that deals with corruption. Is this the way, or are you capable with these various other entities and law enforcement agencies that are already on the ground to deal with corruption effectively?
No, thank you again for that question. The president is correct. It's not for the president to execute the functions of law enforcement agencies or anti-corruption agencies. The president and the executive sets the policy, create the enabling environment for these entities to execute, right? So it's our responsibility as leaders of these agencies to ensure that we create the appropriate capacity, of course supported by the executive, so that we've got capacity to execute. In our case, as SIU, we must make sure that where there's evidence, we go and recover those monies effectively and bring them back to the state. Where there's evidence pointing to criminal action, of course we work closely with NPA. It is also in that space where we must make sure that there's effective prosecution. We support the NPA so that ultimately the people can be jailed. On the official side, we need to make sure also that there's evidence which these accounting officers and accounting authorities can hold those officials to account, get them out of the system, clean up the system so that ultimately we've got really a corruption-free system. The president is correct that we need to demonstrate those results. But of course, another important part is that there is a hue and cry by the public that the recommendations of the State Capture Commission are not really being carried out. I think in few days or so to come, you will see that there will be a clear communication on what is being done. President covered some of the actions here, the monies that have been recovered by Asset Forfeiture Unit, the recovery is done by the Special Tribunal assisting the Special Investigating Unit. We need to come out with a clear and open communication on what recommendations of the state capture have been executed and implemented. The issue around the Single Anti-Corruption Commission, the State Capture Commission made that recommendation. This platform here, the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council, is galvanizing the public to really speak about that. There's a specific stream here focusing on the architecture of the anti-corruption in the country. So, whereas the National Development Plan in Chapter 14 indicates that the country is on a multi-agency approach, the State Capture Commission has said perhaps it's time to really look at a single anti-corruption agency, including looking at the possibility of a procurement agency and so on. So we are here today, yesterday and today, amongst others, to discuss that, exchange views, and then enable the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council to recommend to the President.
Just my final question, and perhaps one we need to be realistic about. The call here is to eradicate corruption in its entirety. Is that a possible reality, to get rid of corruption in its absolute form?
Our observation, and I think the President said it yesterday, the corruption is so endemic, and it involves people. It involves people who lack integrity and are made to be in charge of processes that end up benefiting others corruptly. Now, it's going to be a long process. We need to deal with the system, we need to deal with people, we need to deal with processes. To overhaul that, it's really going to be a process. And there's various aspects of this anti-corruption architecture that we need to look at: protection of whistleblowers, making sure that those who are corrupt are continuously pointed out. The most important part is to deal with impunity. We have really had to endure the process and the years of impunity where people would think that they could, commit acts of corruption and nothing would happen to them. If we continuously show that where there's evidence and credible evidence pointing to anyone, it doesn't matter at what level of society you are, it doesn't matter whether you are a blue chip company, that where there's evidence, we need to take action and make sure that there's consequence management. I believe that this war we will win if we really execute meticulously.
Thank you very much, Advocate Andy Motibi, the person that heads the Special Investigating Unit. Lots been said about the SIU, even by the President yesterday when he opened here, suggesting that over the last 5 years they've been at their most active. We heard, Maseko, that the majority of the rot that they've unearthed over those years is in the department where it's procurement, essentially. 95 to 98% of the corruption that they've unearthed is there in that procurement department that they need to deal with effectively. You heard also just some of the interventions that have been mentioned there, that while a lot of these executives, such as we've seen in Transnet, actually resign when they see that these law enforcement authorities are on their tail, essentially what they now are tending to do is freeze their assets up until the investigations are complete in a bid to just recover some of the funds that are just looted out in some of these state-owned entities.
All right. Senior reporter Aviwe Mtila with that report.